Every week, Question Time travels to a different part of the United Kingdom. Tonight, we've come to Croydon. It's one of London's largest boroughs by population, with almost 400,000 inhabitants. It's one of the biggest financial centres in Greater London, and it's home to the Brit School for Performing Arts, which produced Amy Winehouse, Adele and Ray, among others. As usual, our audience members arriving here this evening reflect the general political picture across the nation. And tonight they want to ask about the war in Iran. Has Donald Trump lost control? And the meningitis outbreak in Kent. How worried should we be? Welcome to Question Time. On the panel, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. He's talked of as one of Labour's future leaders, and he's been helping to coordinate a response to the meningitis outbreak in Kent this week. For the Conservatives, Helen Whately is the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary. She's condemned the government for lifting the two-child benefit cap, saying the welfare state should be a safety net, not a lifestyle choice. Josh Babarinde only entered Parliament in 2024. He's already been elected the President of the Liberal Democrats. Before politics, he founded a social enterprise called Cracked It, which employed ex-offenders to repair smartphones. Caroline Lucas is the former leader of the Green Party and their first MP, holding the seat of Brighton Pavilion for over a decade, standing down 2 years ago. She was named the Observer's Politician of the Year on 3 occasions. And James Orr is the Cambridge academic who's become Reform UK's new head of policy. He's been described as the high priest of the party's intellectual wing and is said to have influenced the worldview of J.D. Vance. Welcome to all of you at home, welcome to our panel, welcome to our audience, and thank you at home very much for watching. There's so much to talk about, I think we should get stuck in straight away. Let's take our first question from Salim Jiwa.
Should President Trump accept that attacking Iran was a mistake?
So many of you want to talk about what is going on between Iran, Israel and the US and how much we're going to get dragged into it. There are issues about energy supply. We're going to come to those later, so we'll park that for a moment, if you will. But should President Trump accept that attacking Iran was a mistake? Wes, was it a mistake?
Well, evidently we think so, because we chose not to join in. And this Prime Minister is one of a very small number of British Prime Ministers in our history who has chosen not to follow the United States on a big call like this. This was a war of choice. There was a peace process underway. So while I have absolutely no doubt about the nature of the Iranian regime, the threat that they pose, the actions of their proxies, there was a process underway that we believed needed more time. And that's why the Prime Minister made the judgment that he did. In contrast, we had Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage attack the government in very strident terms in those early days, saying we should have joined the war in Iran, only barely a week later say, actually, no, we shouldn't.
That's not what she said.
Now, I accept that they have every right to change their mind, but leadership requires 2 things, judgment and backbone, and Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage have shown neither in this instance.
The party leader who changed their mind was the Prime Minister, was Keir Starmer. He was the person who originally said, when President Trump said, could the US use British air bases, he said no. And then he changed his mind and said, oh yes, after all. He's the one who's been flip-flopping, who is weak. And I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about it for my constituents and for the country, because we live in a dangerous world at a time when we need a strong leader. And at the moment, we have a weak and indecisive leader.
So what about Kemi Badenoch's comments, RAF jets need to do more than shoot down missiles and drones, they need to stop the missile sites, you need to go to the source. She also said, we're in this war whether you like it or not, what's the Prime Minister waiting for?
So the point that Kemi was making there is that we have bases in the Middle East and we have troops there who are being fired at by Iran.
But when she said you need to go to the source was Iran. So she was suggesting, I assume, that RF jets need to do more than shoot down missiles. They need to go to the source, i.e. Iran.
So the point there is Iran is attacking our people
I get that.
and our assets.
So was she not saying that we need to therefore attack Iran
so
by
when
saying
we're
you need to
being
go to the
attacked,
source?
she was saying it's not just about intercepting those drones or those missiles, it's also about trying to stop them being fired. So yes, we should be stopping those missiles being fired at us.
So we should have joined in to stop the missiles being fired.
So
from
she
Iran.
was clear that that Keir Starmer should have said to the US, our allies, that we have assets and Iran is an enemy, and they should use those. But she would not have been for a proactive, preemptive attack. But once
no,
we're being attacked,
hang on.
The point is,
hang on. No, wait a minute, Helen. Let's be completely clear about this. Are you confused?
Yeah.
She said
just think of the hokey-cokey and it all makes sense.
She said,
in, out. You cannot do that in the middle of a war.
I want to understand.
It's so ridiculous, the position.
This is not true.
Keir was clear from the beginning.
OK, you made that point. Let Helen answer.
From the beginning, he said we wouldn't join the war, but we would take defensive action.
I was being asked to explain something. I'm not going to suggest clearly a conflict situation is going to be complicated and it's worth spending some time explaining it. Kemi was not saying that we should be involved in proactive attacks. What she's saying is when we are being attacked, of course we should do something about that. By contrast, Keir Starmer Keir Starmer is out saying we shouldn't be involved, we're not involved, it's nothing to do with us. The fact is we are involved, we have got assets there, we have got troops there, and we should be defending them.
We are. And the Prime Minister was clear from the outset. We wouldn't join the war in Iran, but when it comes to protecting our people, our interests and our allies, we would act. We have.
What?
That is clear and consistent.
Hang on.
And that is the difference. I'm sorry, what happened was Kemi Badenoch chose to use an international conflict to score cheap political points.
No.
She cozied up to Trump, realised it was unpopular, and then she pulled back. That's not leadership. That's game playing in the middle of an international crisis.
Your pre-prepared lines that you're trotting out, but the fact is, have we got a battleship, a naval ship, a destroyer in the Middle East yet there, defending our bases, defending our people out there? No, it's only just left the country.
All right. Let me bring other people in on the panel. James.
I'm amazed that Keir Starmer is being portrayed as some strong, decisive leader. He knew that this war was going to happen several days at the very least before it did. On day one, Nigel Farage said, of course, if called upon, we would allow British bases to be used by American aircraft for refuelling. This is not joining the war. This is exactly the position.
He said, in fairness, he said a little bit more than that. Yeah. So on the 2nd of March, Nigel Farage said we should do all we can to support the operation. Richard Tice.
To support
Richard Tice said we, Reform UK, would be helping the Americans and the Israelis in any way they saw appropriate.
It's a bit more than refuelling.
We were clear on day one. Nigel was clear on day one.
Yeah, but what about day 2, 3 and 4?
It was disgrace. Well, on day 2, 3, 4, Keir Starmer came round to our position because he was not clear at the beginning that he would permit bases
that was
to be
not
used.
your position.
So when you've got Richard Tice saying...
Starmer followed
just so I'm clear, because we want to get this clear, don't we? When you have Richard Tice saying we should be helping the Americans and the Israelis in any way they saw appropriate, and then a few days later Nigel Farage saying let's not get ourselves involved in another foreign war.
That's completely the position that Harold Wilson took in the late 1960s.
How do those two work together?
You can give support to your allies. That's not the same as becoming a co-belligerent.
Well, look, credit where it's due, because at least you are, in this case, supporting a British ally, America, rather than parroting Russian talking points. So I guess there has been some...
James, let me ask you to answer the original question. Should President Trump accept that attacking Iran was a mistake?
I think that the outlook, the clarity of objectives were clearly muddy. There's no clarity at all, really, from the State Department or the Department of War as to what these objectives might have been. I think the case that it's a just war is a pretty weak one. It's one that could be defended on some grounds. The innocent suffering in Tehran in January Amnesty International estimating up to 35,000 innocent civilians being murdered on the streets of Tehran for peacefully protesting. I can see from one point of view why that's a justification for trying to, for war against Iran. I think also the moral calculus for Israel is somewhat different than it is for America. I think Israel has a much stronger case for justifying the war in terms of retaliatory action, 300 missiles released against it in April 2024. But again, I'm not actually interested in whether President Trump was right or not.
Well, that's a shame, because that's what our questioner wants to ask. So, should the President Trump accept that attacking Iran was a mistake? Do you agree or not?
I think that the objectives were muddy, and if a war is to be just, there needs to be clarity in the objectives. There's also got to be clarity in the justification. And I think there is a case to be made that the war has prevented innocent suffering, or at least it has attempted to challenge a regime that is notorious for its brutality, not only to its own citizens, but to our citizens as well. MI5 alone has uncovered 20 plots since 2022, organised by the Iranian regime to kill or kidnap British nationals or other nationals on British soil, here on the streets of London, all across Britain.
So just to be clear, on balance, you think it's the right decision?
I think there is quite a plausible justification for it. I think the execution has been cack-handed.
OK. Man here in the front.
Yeah, I think it's clear he's got it badly wrong. I think he thought it was going to be a Venezuelan situation where he could just take the leader out, put his own proxy in, and kind of manoeuvre Iran from there. It's completely naive. He's totally misunderstood the Middle Eastern situation. I can totally understand Labour being cautious because they've been burnt before by wading into a war in the Middle East, blindly following the US. And he's also misunderstood NATO because he just thinks, well, America goes in, fights in the Middle East, and the NATO allies must follow. But it's a defensive alliance. So he's got so many things badly wrong. It's quite startling, really.
Woman in the black top.
Yes. The thing is this. Now, Trump, everyone has, well, put it this way. They know that he just basically has a way of wanting people to follow him. Now, yes, we will follow him, but only if he's correct. Now, he tends to have this idea that, OK, I'm going to say this and everyone's going to agree with me. But in a way, I would say Keir Starmer is not I'm not a fan of him, but he has a way of saying, well, he might stand as checks and balances. Keir Starmer wants to look back and say, well, hang on a minute. What if he's wrong? So Keir Starmer isn't being a wimp, if you will. He's actually taking the time to consider what is and what should be. Okay. Because Trump isn't always right. And we have to agree with this. Sorry, but we have to agree. He's not always right. He tends to do things in a very, very gung-ho. OK, it's the Wild West, that's their history, but he tends to be quite gung-ho where he shouldn't be. OK, for Iran, I think that they should be allowed to elect a proper leader. Not so much, what's the name of that person? Ayatollah? Not so much from Ayatollah, but someone else who can lead properly. Everyone else should just stand back. So that's what I think. Is this possible at all?
Caroline.
Well, I think this is an illegal, reckless war that is certainly being waged by Trump and Netanyahu. I think they have massively underestimated their enemy in this particular occasion. I agree with the man in the front who suggested that. And let's be in no doubt that Trump is a bully and a blackmailer. He's made absolutely no kind of plan for what kind of exit strategy there's going to be. He said we're just going to exit when he feels it in his bones. This is a president who has said he's going to bomb Karg Island just for fun. He has lazily suggested that he might go and attack Cuba as well. The kind of language that he and Pete Hegseth are using is so disgusting when they talk about, I've got the words here, watch what happens to these deranged scumbags today. What a great honor to kill them. I mean, this is not Grand Theft Auto. This is real people's real lives. And yet you get the sense from what's coming from the White House as if this is some big game. And all of us are suffering from it. First and foremost, the people in the Middle East who are dying at the hands of this war, but also, of course, all of us here who are feeling the effects from it too. And let us not forget, in terms of what James was saying, that maybe there's some kind of pretext for this war, let's not forget that just 2 days before the war was launched, there were talks going on, and we've heard that Jonathan Powell Keir Starmer's security advisor was in some way part of them, and he had judged that those talks were going in the right direction and that they were worth continuing, that there was a prize to be had. It was within reach, he said. And when it comes to the nuclear issue, then there was this agreement. Do you remember that JCPOA? I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but essentially it was that agreement that was around trying to control the nuclear materials that...
it was the enrichment programme.
The
uranium
programme,
enrichment
exactly.
programme.
Don't enrich the nuclear materials. And that was working. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was keeping it all contained. So the idea that literally, as these talks were happening, that you would then have Trump just dropping these bombs alongside Netanyahu is just so outrageous. So I'm glad we haven't got more involved in it. But frankly, I don't think we should be having those US planes using our bases either. US strikes on Iran are launched from British bases. Bunker-busting bombs are being loaded onto warplanes by the US in Gloucestershire. US Special Forces apparently have been in Gloucestershire as well. I think we should be really clear this is not our war. And when Donald Trump says to us that he wants us to come and help him in the Strait of Hormuz, we should say to him in the kinds of words he might just understand, Donald, you broke it, you fix it.
Well, we've seen a complete lapse in memory from Reform and the Conservatives tonight when it comes to what their positions are and how these have arrived at, and indeed some pretty stale word salads from them as well. Let me be very clear. This is an illegal war, and we should have absolutely nothing to do with any offensive activity whatsoever. But there's more to this as well. We have been here before. We have been dragged into forever wars in the Middle East by reckless US presidents. I'm glad this government has learnt the lesson, but I'm disappointed that not everybody in our politics has. There is no plan for how this ends. And just look, remember those scenes in Afghanistan when Western forces withdrew and we saw the Taliban take that country back within minutes. We cannot be in a situation where this happens again. And we've seen people in the Middle East pay the price, and we're seeing people in the UK too pay the price, with bills going up and up and up. One last point that I would add is what many people forget when it comes to decisions like this, decisions about whether to engage in this kind of activity, is that when you're talking about our troops potentially in different ways, shapes and forms getting involved, they're British people who we are putting at risk. And what I thought was absolutely deplorable was to hear Kemi Badenoch just a few days ago when she was asked about the RAF. She said that RAF pilots were just hanging around.
You're
absolutely deplorable.
To use those words
were
context.
used, and I hope that you will apologise on behalf of your party and your party leader for disrespecting our hard-working troops in that way.
She was referring to the fact that Keir Starmer was not being decisive and not taking action to defend our troops.
So you won't apologise for your party doing down our troops?
That was not what she was doing. She's the person, if anyone, who speaks up for our troops, who's talking about the importance of investing in defence, unlike other parties.
She said the words that they are
you're busy spending
around.
more money on benefits, voting for extra benefits for people.
Okay,
we're saying, no, we can't do that.
Okay, we're getting slightly off topic again.
You won't apologise for disrespecting our troops.
I'm sorry, but plunging more kids into poverty does not make our country
we're not talking about this. We're talking about the Iran war.
And
I'm going to stop you because I want to take another. There's another question on the Iran. I want to take it, and then you'll be able to come in. And then you'll be able to come in.
Okay.
So let's, because there's. Basically, I've divided it up into two because looking at the questions you suggested tonight, they kind of fell into two categories. So I don't want to spend too long on it, because otherwise we'll never get to everything else. Malcolm Pritchard, where are you? So I want your answer to be reasonably brief, if you would. Malcolm, off you go.
How can we go about ensuring our energy independence to insulate ourselves from global fluctuations?
Right, because of course we are seeing the oil price and the gas price go through the roof, as clearly as a result of what is happening. Caroline.
Well, the best way of insulating ourselves from these kinds of effects is, of course, to go even further, to get off oil and gas as fast as possible, and to properly invest in renewables, in battery connections, and so on. You know, renewables are cheaper, they're cleaner, they're more secure than new gas, and they would bring down bills for good. And what makes me so cross is just thinking back to, 4 years ago when we had the last big shock when it came to oil prices. If only then we had taken some of the action that we're going to now talk about taking again now, then we wouldn't be in such a bad situation. If, for example, back then, we had properly insulated people's homes, a street-by-street, house-by-house, local authority-led home insulation program that could have got people's homes much warmer, their energy bills down, it could have created jobs.
I mean, the government would have had to find the money for all that, of course.
But it's going to save us money in the long term. It absolutely is. And you'll know very well that the Green Party is not shy of saying, if necessary, we will increase tax in order to pay for something like this, because I think for the least well-off households, it absolutely should be paid for. But what makes me so cross, in a sense, is that we will come back to this kind of argument, I'm sure, in a few years' time, saying that we still haven't done enough. We can't keep saying that these crises are wake-up calls and then essentially just turning on the snooze button and doing nothing to really address it. But if I can just preempt what I am quite sure James is about to say, he will, I am sure, tell us that what we should be doing is doing more drilling in the North Sea. And if I could just put it to him gently, that there is no negotiating with geology. And when it comes to the North Sea, it is a declining basin. Most of the gas has already been extracted. The majority of what remains is oil. We export about 80% of that oil anyway because it's not the kind of oil that our refineries use. So the very worst thing we could do now would be to listen to the siren voices of people like James and go for more oil and gas. It really is not the way forward.
James, respond.
Well, extraordinary that you should think you know exactly what I'm about to say.
I've watched it.
The war in Iran is not just a faraway war. It's a war on our energy bills. It's a war on the price of the petrol pump. It's a war on your weekly shop. And it's a war that we could have avoided. It's a war that is a result of us being uniquely vulnerable to external shocks all around the world that affects the price of gas, the price of oil. And how are we in that vulnerable space? Because for years and years and years, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have committed to the reckless pursuit of net zero, which disproportionately hurts those who can afford it least. And that's why last week, or earlier this week, our Shadow Chancellor, Robert Jenrick, announced that there would be a clean £200 cut in our energy bills, £85 by zero-rating VAT on energy and £115 by scrapping the crazy levies imposed by the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. That's a start. It's not necessarily exploiting declining seabeds, declining fossil fuel fields in the North Sea, though there's still enough there. There's enough there that would give us a little bit more than the 12 days of gas storage that we've got, far less than the French. They've got more than 100 days. Why have we got so little? Because we are so disproportionately dependent on renewables. When the wind doesn't blow, you need gas to back it up, and sometimes the wind doesn't blow. And we need to have much, much stronger energy security, energy sovereignty, so that we're immune to wars, geopolitical shocks over which we often have very little control.
But I'm sorry, Karen, I was just going to say, if oil and gas are traded on the international market, because they're not nationalised industries, how does that insulate us?
Well, the prices are fixed internationally, but a portion of them is connected to...
It really isn't. I mean, the bottom line is that this is sold on international markets to the highest bidder. And the idea that we are somehow going to
the marginal price mechanism does make us much more vulnerable than, say, France, which has a much stronger energy mix, much more diverse energy mix. Of course, it's 70% nuclear. So you're not seeing... There's a reason why your bills are so much higher than they are in the rest of Europe, with the possible exception of Germany. It's not an accident. It's a result of political choices. It's a result on unreliable renewables.
They are not unreliable, and what you can do is have interconnectors so that when it's not windy in this country, you import the wind from somewhere else. Honestly, I just despair of the kind of lies, James, that you are telling to people. It really is not right.
These are not lies. That's an awful slur and allegation. These are reasonable disagreements.
Let's let our audience get a word in. Man there in the glasses.
I feel like although we must focus on renewable energy for the future, I feel like with a crisis like this, what the Labour Party could do is remove that green tax off people's energy bills. Because I feel like with the war, we might not see it tomorrow, but we'll see a massive rise in the oil price. And although I support green energy, I think at the short run we should drill the North Sea because Denmark and Norway are doing it.
But wait a minute, the reason that Norway is still able to do it is because they've had state involvement in their oil fields, and so they haven't gone hell for leather as we did by privatising our oil and gas, and therefore we managed to practically empty ours. They had a sovereign wealth fund, they had the state that used a far more gradual rate of reduction in those oil fields.
We're buying fossil fuels from Norway.
Okay.
That is taken from the very seabeds
I have to bring other people in as well.
That we have control over as well.
Man there in the blue sweater.
2 points. One, on the Iran war. It's funny how the Iran war is all being talked about, but Donald Trump isn't in the Epstein files anymore. Secondly, where has all our energy storage gone? Because under the Conservatives, as well as Maggie Thatcher and under Cameron and that, you got rid of a lot of our storage, which is why we have all these energy problems.
Our gas storage,
in the first place, yeah. The one at Battersea Park, right near the station, is gone, and it's got houses and stuff on it. Obviously, we needed it, so what was the point of selling it off?
Helen.
I will acknowledge mistakes that we made in government, whether it's on the storage side or, as James said, in legislating for net zero, when we didn't have a plan to get there. I mean, that's something that Kemi Badenoch has spoken about. You should not set a target if you don't know how you're going to get there, and if getting there, in fact, is going to be unacceptably costly and put huge costs on households' energy bills and also affect businesses. And that's one of the big challenges for our economy at the moment.
So when you were supporting that policy,
for businesses.
when you were in government, did you secretly think, gosh, that's a bad idea, because we've no idea how to carry that out? Or have you just changed your mind now?
Well, I think at the time, I had expected there would be a plan. We're going to put a target in place. We're going to have a plan. It only transpired, became clear later that there wasn't a plan to achieve that. And so I'm glad that Kemi Badenoch has called that out and said, actually, this isn't the right way to go about either having cleaner energy or, in fact, going about government. And she's been very specific as a leader, saying we're not going to just put out policies unless we have a plan to achieve them and know how we're going to fund, for instance, things like our clean power plan, our cheap power plan, coming to exactly the point. So we have set out already. And some of it has been picked up by Reform. Not the first time that Reform has picked up our stuff, because they've done this for welfare too.
But we've already set out. We've been more consistent from day one on net zero.
Okay, let's let Helen answer.
I'll focus on in fact, what I'm sure what the audience and viewers want to know, and our approach to having a cheap power plan, which is, as the gentleman up there was talking about, actually, yes, we should be drilling and using our own oil and gas, and particularly the gas that is available in the North Sea. Unfortunately, it's being taxed at such a way and approached by the government at the moment that that's come all but nigh to a stop. But that gas can be 50% of our gas in this country can come from that source. So actually, it's really, that's a fact.
Ludicrous.
It's really
not that
Caroline,
much
it's a
gas
fact.
There,
it's really
mostly
significant.
Oil. We know that these are basins that are absolutely at their lowest level. So
we disagree. We disagree on this on a point of fact. But first of all, there's drilling, and I also think we know we need gas at the moment. The idea that it's better to get it from overseas than using our own, which incidentally, for someone who cares about clean power, is cleaner than getting it from over else. So first and forwards. Well, at the moment, we're taxing it so much that it's incredibly hard to extract from the basins anyway because of the level of tax on it. So we should be bringing forward more nuclear. Unfortunately, the government has cancelled the next nuclear power supply in the pipeline. And then we should be bringing down bills here and now, as the gentleman there said, by taking those levies, those carbon taxes,
let's ask Wes if he's prepared to do that, shall we?
And those subsidies off people's electricity bills, particularly people's electricity bills, and then people could move to actually cleaner electricity.
So what about the man's point there about even if it's not permanent, just temporarily while bills are going through the roof, to take off those green levies?
So let's see if I can get through this answer without something kicking off on the panel. So in terms of the conflict in Iran, beyond the obvious risk to our people, personnel and allies, the big concern we've got is about the impact of this on prices and the cost of living, and fuel being a big part of that. So we've already put in place the energy price cap, which means people should start to see their bills coming down. The in terms of what we've done on fuel...
That's only for what, the next 3 months or so, I think?
That's for the next few months. The fuel duty as well would be 8 pence higher at the pump than it would have been unless we put the freeze in place. That's there until September. Now, of course, we know that this is a fast-moving situation. We will obviously keep this under review. We're taking regular action on cost of living, on childcare, for example. We're saving families
OK, but let's
£100
stick
a
with
month.
energy. Hang on, let's stick with energy bills. And that man's...
I failed to get through that, someone killed.
That man's question in particular about removing green levies.
Yeah, these are short-term measures, some of which has been done, as has been acknowledged on the panel, by not applying some of these levies. So to the extent we're doing that, I just make this wider point about...
No, but you haven't answered his question.
I just did. I literally just said one of the reasons why...
Did you hear an answer? No. Would the government consider removing green levies?
We already, because of the action we've already taken on levies, bills are lower. We've already done some of that.
No, what?
They could be... Miliband would never let you do that. Then you could cut the bills today.
The levies have been moved or about to be moved to income tax, to be fair.
Energy bills, we've taken action. We will continue to keep that under review.
You can't get away with that, Wes. You committed to bring bills down, I think it was by £300 in advance of the election in your manifesto. They're now, at the moment, £73 higher on average.
The energy price cap is falling. I got an email from my own energy supplier the other day telling me my energy bill is coming down.
Well, lucky you, but on average households are...
Because of that action that we are taking, bills are coming down. We keep these things under review. If the Chancellor needs to go further in the coming weeks and months, she will. That's why she hauled in the fuel bosses last week. I just make this point on renewable
this one energy, be true?
on energy security and where we are on renewables. A decade ago, we would have been having an argument that said, because of climate change, we have to move towards net zero. That was a point of national consensus, actually, and I cannot understand why the Conservatives apologise for the things they got right in government, but never apologise for the things they got wrong in government.
We can't afford it.
And now, here we are, a decade on, and I think, actually, the case for renewable energy is even more stark, not simply because of climate change, but because moving towards renewables is about jobs, growth, lower bills, and crucially, our energy security. Exactly. What is it about relying on petrostates and the fossil fuel roller coaster that says that actually fossil fuels are the way to go? That's not where we want to be.
OK, hang on. You both had your say, and Josh needs to be able to answer this question.
When reforms say they would wage war against clean energy investment, what they would do is put 1.5 million jobs at risk in communities across the country.
Waging
this is jobs,
against
clean power, growth, lower bills, and progress towards climate change. It was right a decade ago. It is even more clear. It's the right direction now.
All right. Josh, you have been very patient. Energy bills. How can we ensure our energy independence to insulate ourselves from global fluctuations?
Well, let's ground this in real people's lives. So I've come from Eastbourne, and in Eastbourne, during the last key spike in energy prices, our food bank became the busiest food bank in the country. People struggling with the cost of living in my town more than anywhere else. So let me tell you what the people of Eastbourne are telling me that they need. First of all, quick emergency support with their bills. That's something that Liberal Democrats have worked up a policy on, an emergency VAT cut on certain energy bills right now to support people through this crisis. But we need a longer-term plan for this.
Where are you going to get the money for that?
We need a longer-term plan for this.
Where would you
now
get
we've
the
got to
money
get
for that?
homegrown.
Where would you get the money for that?
We've got to get homegrown energy.
But where do you think you'd get the money for the VAT?
We've outlined where we'd get a lot of that cash from.
Where?
So there are a number of different measures that we've discussed. Some of it can involve taking cash from some of the other initiatives and putting it into keeping people's bills down. The problem is, if we don't take emergency action now, people are going to struggle to get through to tomorrow, to next week, etc. But the long-term plan...
But Josh, if you're saying you take it from other initiatives, that means something's going to lose out. I'm just wondering what would lose out in order to
ultimately,
cut the VAT?
families are going to lose out if we do not take emergency action now. But let me tell you what we need to do ultimately.
You're still
in the
not
long
saying where you get the money from.
In terms of, we've outlined all of that.
Yeah, but
not here for our audience.
In terms of renewables, we need to invest. We need to invest in homegrown energy. That's how we bring energy bills down and increase energy independence for us in the longer term. Now, folks have spoken about oil and gas and maximising our exploration there. That is a red herring. What's very clear, and you look at a study that came out earlier this week by the University of Oxford, where the reform panellist comes from, which says that on average, it looks like that families would save an average of 30 pence a week if we were to maximise when it comes to oil and gas from the North Sea. That's a red herring. Energy independence ultimately is going to come from doubling down on investment in renewables, and the sooner we understand that, the sooner we can support people in the likes of Eastbourne to support with their energy bills in the long term.
OK, we could clearly spend the entire hour on this. I'm not going to, because there is something very pressing that a number of you have asked about. When you turned up this evening, you hand in your cards with your questions on, and lots of you asked about this. So we're going to do things a little bit differently. Actually, I just need to tell you where we are next week before I do that. We're going to Clacton-on-Sea. So if you want to be part of our audience, apply for the question on our website, follow all the instructions there. Then we've got a couple of weeks off for Easter, and then we're back in Cardiff on the 16th of April. So if you want to be part of that programme, go to the website for that as well. So Clacton-on-Sea and then Cardiff. Right, OK. So you will all know I don't need to tell you about the meningitis outbreak in Kent and the fact that the number of cases have been rising, and that's clearly caused some concern amongst you and I'm sure amongst a number of people at home as well. So let's take a couple of questions, and Wes, I'm going to ask you this. These are kind of public information questions. John Fennell.
Should we be worried that the meningitis outbreak might spread to other parts of the country?
And let me take one more. Andy Billinghay. Yes.
Is it not wise to offer vaccinations to everyone?
Right, go on, Wes, answer these, please.
So, a point of reassurance. Firstly, unlike some of the other infectious diseases we have to deal with, like flu or thinking back to COVID, meningitis B is something that is spread through close personal contact. Things like kissing, sharing vapes, sharing drinks, the sorts of things that would frequently happen in a nightclub, which is why we've seen an outbreak in Canterbury that's been particularly concentrated around the nightclub there.
Can I ask you coughing and sneezing as well? Because I've seen that in some places and not in others.
In close proximity. So if I was to lean over to you and sneeze all over you and you've got loads of droplets all over your face, sorry to be a bit gory about it, but you know, that's the sort of thing you ought to be more worried about. It's not airborne in the way that the other diseases we generally worry about are. Now, since the outbreak, we've done a few things again that people should be reassured by. Firstly, rapid contact tracing of people who've had confirmed or suspected cases. Those people are given antibiotics very quickly. Now, antibiotics for Men B are effective in over 90% of cases, so this is an effective treatment. We've also stood up vaccination in Canterbury for the most at-risk groups, and we're expanding that out. In fact, I've announced an expansion today. So
let's answer these questions directly, because you've been all over the airwaves today, and I know you've said a lot of this already. Should we be worried the outbreak might spread to other parts of the country?
There is a chance, because students have gone home, there is a chance that if someone has carried Men B at home, that they may end up passing it on to someone else. But again, the things that should give us reassurance is the rapid contact tracing. We've now issued 9,000 antibiotics since Saturday night, since Friday night, Saturday morning when we first became aware, and we've had now 1,600 vaccines
let's talk about the vaccinations.
Those are the sorts of things that keep it contained.
Andy is asking, is it not wise to offer vaccinations to everyone? Can you answer that directly?
Yeah, so we rely on independent scientific advice for vaccinations and immunisations. That's the right thing to do. I have actually asked, just this week, as well as standing up vaccinations for the most at-risk groups in and around Canterbury, I've also asked for fresh advice on whether we should expand the vaccination programme more generally. The final point I just want to make about this is what we're likely to see in the coming days. so that people aren't unnecessarily alarmed or worried by what they might see on the news. So we would expect in the coming days for the case numbers to rise, certainly at least until the weekend, because there tends to be a 7 to 10 day incubation period for this disease. We might also expect to see some cases in other parts of the country that are not linked to the Canterbury outbreak, because in any normal year we would tend to see at least 350 cases of meningitis B, so that's roughly 1 a day. And so, for example, we saw the case, sadly, of a baby in London not linked to Canterbury. We may see similar cases across the country, and that's why it's important to keep it in proportion when we see it in the news. What I don't want is people to be unnecessarily worried. I do want people to be aware of the symptoms, things like fever, headache, rapid breathing, drowsiness, shivering, vomiting, cold hands and feet. Those are the sorts of things where people should seek medical attention, and certainly if their symptoms deteriorate, people should seek medical attention. But if you're Joe Public going about your lives around the country, you don't need to do anything differently today than you did yesterday. And I was in Canterbury today. For vast majority of people in Canterbury, life goes on as normal. But we are taking action to keep this contained, and that's our objective for now.
Let's take another question. Charlotte Johnson, where are you there? Off you go.
The NHS remains broken and emergency departments are still overflowing. What else can be done to ensure we have a health service that's fit for the future?
Helen.
Thank you. And just before we pick up on the NHS, I will say on the meningitis outbreak, I've been very involved and in fact in regular contact with Wes as well as with the UK HSA, because very sadly, one of the 2 young people who died, Juliet, was at school in my constituency, and I've been in touch with school and parents, and I've been hearing the questions that you had, lots of questions come in. It's a reflection on the worry going far wider, clearly, than Kent, but locally for me, I mean, people are very, very worried. I think these communications, as Wes has been setting out, are incredibly important. For me, as a health minister during the pandemic, that's something that I thought about as playing a part in responding to this outbreak, and really pushing for clear communications and for this going further as possible, albeit with scientific advice, on the vaccination programme to really get this outbreak under control and to think of some of the wider effects. So, as you said, you saw people going about as normal in Canterbury. So what I'm hearing is children being kept back from school, even though there's so much assurance about actually, it's safe for children to be in school, or people worrying about going out and socialising, which is clearly hard for businesses and actually trying to continue. And we should be, the government must be thinking about these potential wider effects and the sort of wider risks from this, as well as the specific risks of meningitis. To your point about the NHS, as I mentioned, I was a health minister before and care a huge amount about the NHS. In fact, the NHS is the reason why I first got involved in politics. But in fact, I spent a lot of my time as a health minister with specific responsibility for social care. And one of the things I feel very strongly from that experience is we can't just talk about the challenges of the NHS. The NHS and social care are very closely linked. And social care really struggles with funding, and lots of people end up in hospital when they could be being cared for at home or through social care. And that's something I thought when we went into the general election that there was a real consensus across parties that there needed to be more support for social care and more reform in social care. I've been disappointed, I'll say to Wes as he's here, that the government hasn't lent in on social care, and I don't think that we can fix the NHS unless we look at social care as well.
Man in the black jacket.
I worked for the NHS for 16 years. NHS is not broken, it just needs a little bit of help in hand in terms of funding. What we have is there's a lot of my colleagues, they work really hard up and down the country, but we need services to improve. For example, mental health, we have a crisis in Croydon. It's more like a pandemic where mental health patients are sitting 2 to 3 days in A&E to get a bed. So we need to support our NHS, but it's not broken. We have incredible staff working in there.
Okay, the woman here in the front.
So as that gentleman just said, mental health accounts for over 20% of demand for health services. Yet, Health Secretary, you have just announced that the mental health share of NHS spending is to fall for the 3rd year in a row. With over 2 million on waiting lists and 1 in 4 young people with a diagnosable common mental health condition, how can you justify this?
I'll come to you to answer that in a moment. I'll just take a few more points from the audience. Yes, woman there.
I obviously asked the question about the NHS and saying that the NHS is broken. I'm a resident doctor working in an emergency department not far from here. There is never a day that goes by when there are not people in the corridor. The care is unsafe, undignified. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine released a survey yesterday saying that 25% of clinical leads say that their departments are unsafe and they can see harm happening to patients. 88% say that overcrowding is a daily occurrence. I just feel like there's so much more that we can do, and resident doctors working so hard, anybody in the NHS, you know, nurses, allied healthcare professionals, we work so hard, and it's only due to the staff that the NHS really keeps going. I just want to say, particularly to Mr. Streeting, I'm a resident doctor, and I'd like to say on behalf of my colleagues, when all this was going on with regards to strikes, you know, being told that I was a juvenile delinquent and a moaning Minnie when this was going on, I was working night shifts. It's really upsetting to hear that from members of government, and I feel like we deserve more support than that, and we deserve to be thought of in a more professional manner.
Josh, I was going to come to you, but I'm going to let Wes answer that directly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll take the 2 direct points and then the big picture.
Skip the big picture a minute. Let's take, because we're never going to get to the end of it.
No, you don't,
I want you to...
I'm sorry. There's absolutely no way in which you have a question about is the NHS improving,
fair enough.
and you can't talk about the NHS. Sorry,
no, I take your point, and that is fair enough. So just try not to take all night.
I'll be really brief about this. So, firstly, I was never talking about resident doctors. I was talking about the BMA, but I'm not going to repeat that this week because we're actually been working really well together since the start of the new year. I think we're this close, I hope, to being able to agree something. I really want us to work together. You're absolutely right, we can't turn around the NHS without you and without the 1.5 million people who work for it. That's why we did the big pay increase when I came in. I know there's more to do, but I really do respect you as well as value the work that you do. On mental health, you're right about mental health as a share of the overall NHS budget, but mental health funding has gone up in real terms every year that I've been Health Secretary. And the reason why the proportion is as you've described is because of the extra investment we're putting into cutting the overall waiting list and improving urgent and emergency care, which takes me to the big picture. Both of those things we've heard this evening about patients on corridors in conditions which are wholly unacceptable and an improving NHS, they're both true at the moment. We inherited an NHS going through the worst crisis in its history. Waiting lists are now at the lowest level they've been in 3 years. Ambulance response times are the best they have been for half a decade. And in terms of people waiting 4 hours in A&E or less, which is what we aim towards, those numbers are looking better than they have for the last 4 years. But I would be the first to say there is so much more to do. And the reason I try and acknowledge both of those things simultaneously is I never want people to think we're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, not admit that things are really difficult for staff and not acceptable enough for patients in too many cases. Of course, that's true. But I don't want people to lose on hope and belief that the NHS was broken, but it is not beaten. And there are people in this country now, sitting not too far away from me in the Reform Party, who are arguing that the NHS we've had since 1948, owned by us, there for all of us, free at the point of view, so that whenever you fall ill, you never have to worry about the bill, it's unsustainable. It's unaffordable. We can't go on like this. We could do it in 1948 after the Second World War when we built the NHS. We can do it again for the 21st century as we rebuild the NHS. It's going in the right direction. We're on the road to recovery, but there's a lot of road ahead and my foot's down the accelerator and I'm not going to stop until we get there.
Thinking about big picture again, prevention is a key thing. For a very long time, we've put lots and lots of cash into cure, and that's absolutely right in many respects. But we could avoid so many people ending up getting so ill if we invested much more in prevention. And to give Wes and the government credit where it's due, that's something that this government is doing more of. Something else, though, that we need to look at, and Helen discussed this as well, is social care. you cannot fix the front door of the NHS unless you fix the back door, social care. So many people do not need to be in hospital. They're ready to be discharged, but they can't be because there are no social care beds for them. And then let's take the state of our hospitals. So many of our hospitals in this country are crumbling. And Boris Johnson promised that he would rebuild 40 new hospitals across the country, and it has transpired that they are not new, the hospitals that were pledged, and indeed many of them have not been built at all, most of them, including in my own patch. In my own patch of Eastbourne, we had a power cut some weeks ago at our hospital. It knocked out the power in a number of areas of our hospital. Nurses have told me that they were using iPhone torches to be able to see what they were doing. Operations cancelled. Our midwifery unit closed for a number of days. We desperately need to front-load investment in hospitals like mine. That's a direct pitch to you.
Wes is nodding.
But something else that we need to do, I think, to help preserve our NHS is make sure that reform do not get anywhere near to it. Nigel Farage...
Absolutely right. James, I will let you on, but I'll let you on.
Nigel Farage has spoken about destroying the fundamental principle that's at the heart of our NHS
right. Not true.
and replacing it with a social insurance system that will completely change the public's relationship with our NHS
Josh, and
change it full stop. We cannot let that happen. Nigel Farage does not want to protect our NHS, and we need to make sure that we stop him from dismantling something so important to our society.
That is not true at all, Josh. We have never, and Nigel Farage has never said that the NHS should be anything other than free at the point of delivery. But we know, you here in this audience will know, that there's a 13-hour waiting time at your local hospital. That's nearly double the national average, which is already too high. There are patients having to use beds in corridors, or at least, as Wes at least admitted. We have been spending more and more and more, both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. And as the gentleman up, as a number of you have said, there hasn't been any proportionate increase in the quality. And so all that Nigel Farage and the Reform Party are asking us to consider is what majority after majority of British people in poll after poll and survey after survey are suggesting, which is maybe pumping more money in is not in fact the answer. Maybe we should be thinking about different structures to the NHS without undermining in any way that basic principle that's been there since 1948 and that we uphold 100% and unequivocally that it should be free at the point of use. The NHS is...
What does that mean, James? Does that mean free for those who for some people, but for others there could be a... I mean, when Nigel Farage said we need to fundamentally rethink the model, what is he talking about?
What he's talking about is the model, as I think everyone on this panel concedes, is simply not working. That doesn't mean
I don't concede that.
No.
Let's be clear what Reform is suggesting.
Farage said he wants an insurance-style system, and he said he's up for anything. I'm sure he is.
That is not
and I'm sure he can afford it.
Okay,
if he can't, he knows a Russian who can. But most people can't.
He is the
most people couldn't afford to pay for their health care.
With the courage to say we should have options on the table that work within the constraints.
What options?
Like what?
This is really dangerous.
Well, no, let's hear. Let him finish. Like what?
Absolutely not. The point is, Reform recognises that British people know that the NHS.
Okay, you haven't said what the other options might be,
be,
James. What are you thinking?
The point is,
poll after poll shows that people want NHS free at the point of use. That's the NHS.
Okay, but hang on. Let's get an answer.
And that is
the other options could be what?
Under a Reform government.
So what could the other options be?
There will be a long process of policy ideation. We're going to be talking to experts.
You must have some idea. When Nigel Farage says we need a fundamental rethink of the funding model, and you're talking, we've got other options. Just enlighten us. What options are you considering?
What he is saying, and what I think everybody recognises, is that more money, more investment is not delivering proportionate gains.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you once. Hang on. I'm just going to ask you once more, because I think it's clear to me we haven't got an answer. What other options are Reform UK considering in terms of the NHS?
We are preparing for government. We are looking.
That's what worries us. That's what worries us.
Ways to maintain the basic principle that the NHS will always be free at the point of delivery. But there are all sorts of ways in which we could rethink management structures, think about the ways that the funding is allocated more efficiently, working out why mental health is getting worse despite increased funding.
OK, so just to be clear, are you categorically ruling out, then, that part of the mix for funding the NHS would not be a social insurance policy under a Reform UK government?
It will always be free at the point.
He's not ruling it out. That's exactly what they're going to do. They're just not honest enough to say it because they know it's unpopular and people would never vote for it.
You
are standing in Wales, the country that built the NHS, with a party that would dismantle it. People in Wales should bear that in mind. People across the country should bear that in mind before they vote reform in. You would dismantle the NHS given the chance. You just don't have the guts to say it.
Read our manifesto, Wes. We're absolutely clear that that is not on the table.
No one believes you.
Caroline,
thank you.
Trying to get a word in edgeways.
Well, thank you. I mean, do you trust this man, I would like to ask you, because I have visions in my head of a bus with £350 million.
But hang on, there are people in this audience who support reform. So there are people in this audience who support reform, that is not a unanimous view.
Who support reform, but that's quite different from the people who are trying to lead reform, I would suggest. But I wanted to come back to the question because it was hugely important. And in particular, I was also reading that report that you mentioned from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. And for me, it was just horrifying reading when they were talking about, in particular, how the NHS can't cope if there were to be, God help us, another pandemic, that top doctors were warning of this explosion, as you've already described, of corridor care. Some of the figures, a record 71,000 patients waited for more than 12 hours in A&E in January 2026, and that was up from just 627 in January 2019. Now, I was talking to my hairdresser, who is the Oracle, and he was telling me about his
Aren't they always?
And his mum lives in Swansea, and she's 93, and she fell over in her flat and fractured her pelvis. She rang, or somebody with her rang, the ambulance 999 at 11 o'clock on one day. Guess what time it came?
I dread to think, go on.
11 o'clock the following day. That's 24 hours. So something is going hugely wrong, and we've touched on some of those things, whether that is not enough funding going into social care, so there are blockages in hospitals, or whether it is preventative work. And I am deeply concerned and share your concern around mental health. And why aren't there more early interventions to deal with mental health? If we're talking about some of the preventable issues like air pollution causing all kinds of illnesses because we have such dirty air, if we're talking about not having affordable and healthy diets. But I also want to say, Wes, it's a question of where the money is going. And you've handed over our private patient data to Palantir,
no, we haven't.
A company with far-right connections who are helping Trump's ICE thugs, these thugs that are going around taking people off the street to try and deport them. And that, that's where some of the investment is going, is in contracts with people like Palantir. If that money was instead going into the front line, we might all have a better chance of having a better NHS, because the people are there. We are so blessed with the kind of people who are working in our NHS, but they need the support. That's going to mean more funding, but it's also going to mean tackling some of these causes, these underlying causes, like poor air quality, which we should be having a joined-up policy on, or to do with healthy food, or to do with mental health.
We are out of time, I'm afraid. Look at so many of you with your hands up. There was so much to be said on the panel. I was kind of fighting to get you in, so apologies to those of you I didn't manage to include in this debate. Just want to say on Palantir, obviously they are not here to answer for themselves, but they have denied some of those allegations in the past and say they do not store data, as you know. But they are not here, so I need to put their right of reply. But that is it for this week. Thank you so much to the panel. Thank you very much to all of you for putting your questions, those of you who were able to get in. And thank you at home for watching. Remember, next week we're in Clacton-on-Sea, then a couple of weeks off at Easter. Happy Easter, by the way. And then we'll be in Cardiff. So for now, from Croydon, from all of us here at Question Time, bye-bye.